We're finally at our machine and we're ready to start setting things up and learning some of the basics of free motion quilting. As you can see here, I've got my free motion quilting darning foot and my embroidery needle on my machine, and I am ready to start setting things up. As you can see, I also have my extension table attached to my machine, and I have my Supreme slider set in place. I've got my gloves and my quilt halos, and I've got my machine threaded. Now let's talk about some of the important settings on your machine. Everybody's machine is going to be different, so I'm going to kind of give you a broad explanation and we'll go from there. The first thing is your thread path. Your thread path when free motion quilting or quilting for any piecing, anything, is really important. And I found that using a thread tree has made a world of a difference in breaking thread, needles, and tension issues. As you can see, my Juki comes built in with a thread tree, and what this does is it actually pulls the thread up off of the spool instead of spinning the spool, and that will make a huge difference. So if you have a machine, like over here I have my Janome, has this spool holder here. I actually hardly ever use this other than when I'm winding my bobbin. I bought a separate thread tree that I have set next to my sewing machine that I use when I'm doing any of my piecing on this machine. So I think that a thread tree is very important, and having a correct thread path where the thread is going up and then back down to your machine is one of the best things to help with your free motion quilting. The next thing is your free motion quilting settings. You are going to need to make sure that you have your stitch length set to 0. And what that's going to do is that's going to disengage your feed dogs from pushing forward. Now, most machines nowadays have the ability to drop your feed dogs, which you can try. I encourage you to kind of play with it. You can try it with them down or with them up. But as long as you have your stitch length at 0, those feed dogs, they will move up and down, but they won't pull your fabric. And since I have them underneath my Supreme slider here, I'm all set. Like I said, you can drop your feed dogs. You may have tension issues if you do that. You may not. So go ahead and try it. If you drop your feed dogs, they will completely drop down and they won't move up and down at all. They're completely disengaged. Either way, you will still be able to free motion quilt. If you have a machine that doesn't allow you to drop your feed dogs, don't worry. Just make sure you have your stitch length set to 0. Now on my Janome, I can't actually set my stitch length all the way to 0. So I would drop my feed dogs on that machine. The next thing is your tension. Tension is going to be really important when you're free motion quilting. So the best way is to make sure that your tension is ready to go with basic piecing. So before you set up your free motion quilting setup and before you put your darning foot on, sit down and make sure that your tension is perfect when you're just piecing 2 pieces of fabric. If it's all ready to go, then you're ready to move on to free motion quilting. And you shouldn't have to touch your tension very much if it's working properly with basic piecing. Right now on my Juki, I have my tension set to just over 2, and that is just what seems to work best for my machine. Some of the other important features that you may or may not have on your machine are needle up and down. So when you're sewing, does your machine stop with the needle in down position, or does it come back up and stop in the up position? That's something that you're going to need to figure out. When you're free motion quilting, it's easier if your machine stops in the down position. And so if your machine, like mine here, has this button which allows me to move my needle up and down, And my machine automatically will always stop in down position, which is very helpful. Now let's say you don't have a machine that stops in down position. What you will do is when you stop, you want to carefully move your hand from what you're quilting on over to the hand wheel on your sewing machine, and you're going to want to put the needle in down position manually before you take both hands off of the piece that you're working on. That's just assures that you don't bump it, move it, and will keep you directly in the place you want to be when you stop. I also have already pre-wound some bobbins. When I'm about to sit down and do a large quilting project, it won't be the case necessarily with these quilt blocks, but I will wind 5, 6, 7 bobbins so that I don't have to stop and unthread my machine and wind my bobbin in the middle of sewing. That I have lots of extra, so I've already got my extra wound. I have a pair of tweezers which are going to come in handy, and some of my sewing machine tools. I have my screwdriver just in case I need that. And I've got my speed dial set to about halfway, and we can adjust that as we go, but right now it's set to about halfway to help give me a little bit more control when I am quilting. Go ahead and take out one of your 10 by 10 test squares. You've got all of your settings ready to go. One of the first things you're going to want to check is the pressure on your presser foot on your quilt. So if it's too tight and you can't move your quilt top, then something's wrong. You need to actually loosen that up, raise it up so you have more room. You want to be able to have a nice amount of space underneath that presser foot so you can move your quilt nice and free, but you don't want too much space, otherwise you'll break needles and you'll break thread. So you need to find that perfect sweet spot where you can move nicely but it's not too loose. So I'm going to drop our needle down, bring it back up, pull it aside just a bit so I can see, and I'm going to pull on the top thread, there it is, until your bobbin thread pops up. And I'm going to get my tweezers and pull my thread up. So I've got my bobbin thread and my top thread tail are about the same length. Reposition to where I started, pull my threads back. And this is how you're going to start every single time. Because what we're going to do is we're going to actually bury those threads in the quilt top when we're done. And we don't want to just leave them really short. It's way better quality if you actually keep your thread tails long and bury them later. And when I'm starting on the corner right here, I don't have very much room to grip onto. So I'm going to actually rotate this just a little bit so I have a little bit more control right here. And I'm going to begin. Let's just start off with a stipple, and we're going to go really slow to medium speed and move your hands. Our goal is to try and move your hands at the same speed through the curves and out of the curves, and just in one consistent movement. Now when you get close to the edge here, it's going to be, you're going to notice like some puckering right here, and it's going to be a little bit harder to control. So you want to keep your hands close to the needle and keep your hands flat, and just keep that area spread out so that you don't get any puckering, and then we'll work our way back in. So you're going to move the quilt as evenly as you can. And now when you get too close to your hand, you need to just stop, reposition your hands, gain control over your quilt top again, and then move forward. Now, let's talk about some of the important things that you need to be doing when you begin stippling. First of all, I'm working from this side, and I'm going to work my way across in a row, and then I'm going to work my way back down underneath it. When it comes to speed and stitch length and tension, you're going to notice when you first begin that you have probably some really wacky tension things going on. Most likely it's not your machine. Usually when you're first beginning, you're going to run into a lot of user error. One of the things you may notice is I have an example here, let me put it in the light, right here, of these little eyelash looking stitches on the back side of your quilt. It may look fine and dandy on the front, but what's happening on the back is a whole different story. So you always want to check and see what's going on the back of the quilt. On this one, these little eyelashes are caused because when you are going into the curve, you speed your hands up. And then when you come out of it, you slow down again. And what happens is you end up getting that tension pull on your stitches. So the big goal that you're going to want to try and achieve is moving fluidly and consistently through the curves and out of the curves, through the curves and out of the curves. You can play with your speed until you find a comfortable spot. Do whatever speed you feel more comfortable with. You don't have to go zippy fast. If you go slower, move your hands slower. If you go faster, move your hands faster. But whatever speed you choose, try to move your hands consistently the same speed. When you go too fast, if you move your hands too fast but your machine is going too slow, you're going to get really long stitches. If you move your hands too slow but you're going really fast, you're going to get itty bitty little tiny stitches that are right on top of each other, just don't even look right. So if you see one of those two things, normally that means that you're not going the right speed with your hands with how you're moving on your machine.